let's test another input. Let's actually do something with this program for a change. I'm going to enter my input directory, which is going to contain the image that I want to edit. In fact, I'm going to specify the image. I'm going to say I want to forge puppy.jpg, and then the output directory that I want to save it to. And then I'll just try mode 1 for now. Mode 1 is just changing the author information in the metadata. So you'll notice that it doesn't execute successfully. Instead, it provides an error message saying what kind of a mode is that. In this case, we know it's printing out what kind of a mode is that. So I can search for that. Actually, I see it right here. I don't even have to search for it. But yeah. So in this case, we want our mode to be 1, right? Because we entered 1. And here we're checking if it's not equal to 1, it will do this. If it is equal to 1, it'll continue execution. So obviously the problem must be with our mode variable, right? So that's our significant variable here. So let's just figure out what mode is. Interesting. You'll see that our mode is in fact 1, which is what we want it to be. But for some odd reason, it is not skipping over this print statement, is going into it. And we can check this condition if we really care to. And the condition should be, in this case, false. I'll show you what the condition is. Sec mode is not equal 1. We can check that. Here I'm just converting the Boolean to a string. I'm not sure that I really need to do that, but I'll do it just in case. Here, what we want is we want this to return false, which would mean that the program continues execution. But we're assuming that this portion is returning true, and that's why we're going into the if portion of the if else. So let's check that. Yeah, so it is returning true. We want it to return false. So there must be something wrong with this line itself. And maybe at this point, if you didn't know the problem, you'd go and look it up. But I know that the problem is most likely that mode is of type string, and we're comparing it to a value of type integer. And so it's not going to be the same as the integer 1. It's going to be the same as 1 surrounded by double quotes or single quotes. So I can check that by, let's do this again. I'm just going to write condition this time. It's going to make more sense. Hopefully, this condition, why can't I type? This condition should return false, because that would allow us to bypass this conditional here. Yes, so here the condition is false. So now that means I have two options. I know I use mode later on, and I also compare it to an integer, so I don't want to have to change it everywhere. I just want to keep mode as an integer. I can either cast it to an integer here by going like this, or my other option is I can make all these comparisons to the string, to the respective string values, and then if this is not actually printed, then we can cast mode to an integer. And I'm going to do it this way, and here's why. If I put this statement up here instead, then let's say the user entered some bogus value for mode. Like let's say they entered a non-integer value. Well, then the program would return an error. It would return an exception, and then we'd have to work with that exception. In this case, if they enter some bogus value for mode, well, it's not going to throw that exception because we're actually converting it to an integer here. Instead, it's going to notice that it's not one of these 4 options, and it's going to print what kind of mode is that. And of course, I'm using an else for visual appeal because the printing usage automatically stops the program from executing. So I really don't even need the else. I can just put the statement here, but I like having the else there. So we'll see if that works. Well, we're not getting the same problem anymore, so I'm assuming that worked and we're getting a different exception instead. Here we actually have a runtime error. So let's look. It says it's occurring at line 157. So let's check line 157. Now you'll notice we have this long line at 157. And the problem is file is not defined. So if you look here, I have input that ends with PNG, input that ends with PNG, file that ends with JPG, but I never actually defined file in this function. And the reason this error is probably here is because most likely I copy and pasted it from here, where I'm actually dealing with multiple files in a list of files. And so I forgot to change this to input because here I called it input, there I called it file. So hopefully that should fix the problem. Okay, so it's not the same problem as before. So it most likely fixed that problem, and now we're going on to a different one. So here's an instance where we get multiple line numbers. And keep in mind that each of the line numbers predecessing line numbers are function calls that are calling the specific function. Then the last one is the actual line at which the error is occurring. And so you can check that actually. If you look at line 161, let's go to line 161. It's calling the function change metadata, right? And so line 71 should be inside the change metadata function. And if we go to line 71, it is in fact inside the change metadata function, and it's calling random author. And so line 37 should be inside random author, and that's where actual error is occurring. So it's occurring right here. So now that we've determined that, we see that the problem is can only concatenate string, not generator to string. So not entirely sure whether the problem there is with author or whether the problem is with random strings. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to print out each, figure it out, what doesn't look right. And you'll notice that we did indeed print out the author correctly. Now, the way this program works here is first I choose a random uppercase letter, and I use the separate random string method that returns 4 lowercase letters, and then I put in the uppercase letter first, and then I add the 4 lowercase letters so that we get a random author. It starts with a random uppercase letter and then 4 random lowercase letters. And so if we look here, it did print out the author successfully, but it didn't execute our second print statement successfully, which is strange because if random string does indeed return a string, then this print statement should have printed out the value of a random string. But instead, it gave us a type error. It said can only concatenate string, not generator to string. So that means the problem is random string must not be returning a string like it's supposed to. So let's look at random string, which is conveniently right here. What's it actually returning? It's returning random.choice letters for I in range length. What does that mean? That means you pass in length as your parameter, right? And if you give it nothing, which is what we did, then it'll automatically default to 4. And then it will return that many times a random letter choice from all the ASCII lowercase letters. Now, At this point, if you didn't know why this doesn't return a string, you might have to look it up, go into documentation, but I know that this is actually generator here, and to convert it to a string, all I have to do is go like this, add a join. And what that's going to do is it's going to say here's a blank string, and then join this blank string with each of these letters. I don't know if I explained that very well, but hopefully that should work. And let's keep our print statements here, and let's exit the program here so that it doesn't keep going, so we can just check if this part works. Yeah, so that looks right. Now we actually have a random string, which is what we wanted. So we can get rid of these print statements, and we can keep going. Well, hey, look at that. Looks like it worked. Changing metadata for puppy.jpg, metadata changed successfully, and the output file is stored in users Jonty documents output puppy. So let's check it out. If I go to my output folder, I do indeed have a puppy image, and it looks like my input image. Hopefully it's the same image. And if I go and look at the metadata, you'll notice that it did indeed change the author metadata. So now instead of some random dude, it is, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. So yay, it works.